Last year, I had a pretty creepy experience involving a wrong number, or at least that's what I thought it was. Randomly one time, I got a text from a number that I didn't know simply saying, "Hey." I wasn't sure who it was, so I said, "Hey, who's this? I don't have this number saved." The person responded saying, "Hey Mark, meet me." My name is not Mark, so I knew that it was a wrong number. I responded saying that I was not Mark and they must have the wrong number. Very soon after, I got another text. They said, "Okay, who are you?" I realized then that it was probably a scam and they were trying to get my information. I heard about some of these sort of text scams and had gotten one once before. Most of the time, if somebody actually has the wrong number, they will just say, "My bad, wrong number," and then not text again. They wouldn't be very interested in you, but only interested in the actual number they're trying to reach. So when they asked who I was, I didn't respond. But surprising to me, they texted again a while later. This time they texted saying, "Answer me." This was strange, but I still thought that it was a scam. I responded and said, "I'm not falling for your scam." I thought then that they wouldn't respond to me, but I was wrong. Just moments after I sent the text, they tried FaceTiming me. At first, I didn't answer it. I thought that it was too weird, and I was not expecting it at all. But after I didn't pick up, when I did, it was hard to see at first who was on the other end. But after looking, it appeared to be somebody who was in a very dark, unfinished basement. I couldn't make out the details of their face because it was too dark and sort of blurry. The quality wasn't the greatest either, but I could tell that it appeared to be a man, and he started talking in an extremely deep voice. The voice did not sound natural, like he was trying to fake it. As he spoke, I couldn't make out any of the words that he was saying either. He was sort of mumbling, and it didn't make any sense. I said nothing because I had no idea what to possibly say. I just sat there watching him in shock. He continued to move around the dark basement and ramble incoherently in that creepy deep voice. He went on for about a minute or two, and I couldn't take it anymore. I ended the call, and then I blocked the number right then and there. It was really strange. After that, I didn't get any other weird texts or calls. Looking back at it now, I still have no clue who that was. I'm not sure why they texted me or called me. It was not the scam like I thought it was. But what was it? I'm still trying to figure that out. This happened a long time ago. Back then, I lived in an apartment by myself. This would have been sometime in the early 2000s. So I was trying to call my friend one night on the home phone in my apartment. I had her number written down and had almost memorized it. My phone was kind of old and I didn't have caller ID or many modern functions. That wasn't a big deal to me though. So anyways, as I was dialing my friend, I must have dialed the wrong number because when the call got picked up, I heard a man's voice. I knew that my friend lived alone like I did. Still, I asked if she was there, and the guy said that nobody by that name lived there. So I said that I was sorry and I must have dialed the wrong number. The man said he understood and it was okay. Then I hung up. I dialed again for my friend, and this time made sure to dial each number correctly. When the call went through, I got my friend and then I started talking to her. We were best friends and we talked on the phone almost every day, many times for hours. So when we were talking, I remember that I heard another call coming in, but I didn't bother to hang up and answer it. I talked with my friend for about an hour and then hung up. After that, it was sometime at night, maybe 9 o'clock or so. I got another call on my phone and picked it up. I heard a man on the other end and realized that it was the same guy who I had accidentally called earlier. He said hi and that he tried to call me before. I told him that the line had been busy. He said that after I called him, I sounded cute and asked if I wanted to go on a date with him sometime. He also said that based on my area code, he figured that we lived in the same city. I realized that the guy must have had caller ID. To me, this did not seem like a good idea. For one, his voice didn't sound very attractive to me, but also, for me being a young woman, I didn't think it was smart to go on a random blind date with a guy who I accidentally called the wrong number. I told him that I just didn't want to, and it was nothing personal, but I didn't know him. He tried to convince me, but I really didn't want to, and I was finding it to be increasingly awkward. Finally, the guy said he understood and then hung up. But apparently, he did not in fact understand, because he called me back like 10 minutes later. I answered because again, I didn't have caller ID, and I didn't know who it was that was calling me. When I answered the phone, he asked if I had changed my mind yet. I said no, it's been like 10 minutes. He said that he just thought he would ask, and I said, okay, goodbye now, and then I hung up the phone. Then I called my friend again, because I just had to tell her about the crazy thing that had happened. For the rest of the night, the man did not call. The next day, I was at work during the day like usual. I got back to my apartment and was having a normal night with no strange phone calls or anything. But at about 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my apartment door. I didn't know who it would be because I wasn't expecting anyone, and I wasn't thinking about the man in the moment who had called me previously. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a guy standing there. He just had a creepy look to him and gave me a bad feeling, and I'm not just saying that. I had not remembered the phone calls in that moment. I was about to answer the door when I saw the guy reach into his pocket. I was curious, so I kept watching. He took out a cell phone and then started dialing a number. Moments later, my phone rang. That's when I realized who it was. I walked over to my phone, and for some reason, I answered. The guy asked me if I was at home, and I said, "What's it to you?" The man told me to open my front door. That's when I knew for a fact who it was, and I told him to go away. He said that I should go out with him and give him a chance. I told him that if he didn't go away now, I was calling the cops. He got offended and then finally hung up the phone. I went to the peephole again thinking that he had left, but he hadn't. He was still there. Then he loudly banged on the door. I still didn't open it. He yelled at me, demanding that I let him in, but I still wouldn't do it. By this point, I was about to call the cops, but he finally turned and stormed off. That's when I looked out of the door again for a while and made sure that he had gone. And after he was out of sight, I looked out into the hallway just to make sure that he was actually gone. He was. I was extremely creeped out by the guy. I don't know how he knew exactly where I lived. I think that maybe he looked me up in the phone book. It was a very scary experience, though. For 1 year when I was in middle school, I did homeschool. It was mostly just online, so it was pretty much like online classes for college, except there wasn't really a teacher. It was all done on this computer program and on the internet. So every day for school, I would just sit in my room at my desk and computer and do school there. Overall, it wasn't too bad, but I didn't really leave the house much. When I wasn't doing school, I would stay on my computer and usually play video games there as well. And the next day, I remember that I did my school again like normal. After that, I played video games, and I remember that I stayed up late playing on my computer after my parents had gone to bed. But during this time, at probably after midnight, I got another email. It was from the same school email that I had received the night prior. This one had no words, but just a photo that was attached. The picture was of my house at night, taken from the street. I was so confused and also creeped out. It was very strange. I looked at the picture for like 5 minutes straight, wondering what was going on. Then I went over and looked out of my bedroom window. I did notice that there was a car parked on the side of the road just past our house. The engine was off, and I couldn't tell if anybody was inside or not because it was too dark, but it usually was not there. Most of the time, cars did not randomly park on the side of our street. I was really freaked out. I went back to the email and just kept looking at it. Then I realized something. This was not the official email address from my school. They had the same name and same logo, but the email for this was one letter off, which is why it was hard to see at a glance. This was somebody pretending to be my school. I had no idea who would do this or why though. It wouldn't be one of my friends messing with me or something like that, because I wasn't even old enough to drive and neither were any of my friends. This was so strange. I went back over and looked out of the window again. The car was still there. I thought about waking up my parents, but didn't. I went back to the email and blocked the account. Then I just hoped that nothing crazy would happen. I went around the house and made sure that every door was locked, which it was. Then I made sure that every window was completely covered. A few were not, and I covered them. After that, I went back to my room. I checked out of my window again, and the car was still there. After that, I stayed at my computer playing video games to try to get myself to calm down. Eventually, I did. It was probably close to 3 a.m. by the time I was able to fall asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I checked the window and the car was gone. I also checked my email and did not receive anything else strange. I went around the house and there was no signs of a break-in or anything, so everything was all good. After that, I wondered about it for a few days, but nothing else happened. I only did that school for that 1 year, and nothing else strange like that ever happened again. I still wonder who did it. And was that car on the street whoever took the picture? I mean, somebody had to know that I did that school program, and then they would have had to pretend to be them to get me to fill out the form for my address. But for what purpose? Just to creep me out with that picture? I'm really glad that nothing else happened. This happened just a couple of months ago. It was the weekend and I was up late watching TV. I was in the living room of my apartment and relaxing after a long day of work. My apartment is not that big. It's basically one giant room with a kitchen at the front by the door and then the living room past that. I think that's a pretty standard setup. Then there's one bathroom and one bedroom off of that down the tiny hallway. So as I sat there feeling relaxed and having an ice-cold drink, I suddenly heard a knock at my apartment door. I didn't know who would possibly be there because I obviously was not expecting anybody. I looked over to the door but did not bother to get up. I figured that it was probably a mistake. Maybe somebody was trying to go to another apartment. After maybe 20 seconds, they knocked again. Then I heard a younger man's voice say, "DoorDash." Now, I did not order anything on DoorDash. In my mind, this was a simple mistake. One of my neighbors must have ordered food, and the delivery guy simply had his address mistaken. So I got up from the couch and started walking over to the door. My plan was to just tell the guy that he had the wrong place and to double-check the address. When I got to the door, I opened it. But as soon as I did, I saw that there was not just one guy there, but there was 3 men. They were all dressed in dark clothing and had sweatshirts and jackets with hoods up. My door was open for literally half a second, and as soon as I started to open it, I thought better of it and began to close it. The main guy right at the door then went forward and tried to stop me, but he must have realized that he would have gotten the door slammed on his arm because he almost reached in and then didn't. After I slammed my door shut, I very quickly locked it. Pretty much the next second, the guy tried to open the door. Then I heard the other 2 guys get closer. They kept trying to open the door and then they started banging on it and kicking it as well. It was really loud and I thought that the door might break. So I quickly ran into the other room and then I got my phone and dialed 911. But the guys banging and trying to break in did not last long, because within probably a minute it stopped. Then I heard them all running away down the hallway. I told the police what was going on and they said they would have an officer there shortly. And the cops arrived pretty quick. It was probably within like 5 minutes. However, by that time, the men were all gone. I'm not sure where they went, but they were no longer in the apartment complex. I assumed that it was an attempted robbery, but I don't know why they picked me. My apartment is just like all the others. I'm not rich or anything, so maybe it was just random. I'm just glad that I had fast instincts to close the door as soon as I had opened it, or else I think they might have barged their way in. It was about a year ago when my parents and sister went out of state for a sports tournament, and I was left alone in the house for 3 days. I'd never been home by myself for that long, and I thought it would be nice to have some peace and quiet. The first night went by without anything out of the ordinary. I watched a couple of movies, made some popcorn, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't think much of it when I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. It was not anything specific, just a weird sense that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, everything seemed fine. I spent most of the time inside, just relaxing and watching more movies. By the evening, the feeling started to creep up again, like there was someone there, even though I was alone. I checked the house to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked, and everything looked normal. I even walked around the yard for a bit to see if anybody was outside, but I didn't find anything. By the time the third night rolled around, I was starting to get a little jumpy. I woke up again between 2 and 3 a.m. and I heard footsteps outside. It wasn't anything loud, just faint footsteps like somebody was walking on the gravel path outside. My heart started to race a bit, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't fall asleep again, so I grabbed my shoes and flashlight, and I went outside to check things out and ease my mind. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight around, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel stupid about going outside alone in the middle of the night when I heard something from the woods behind the house. It was faint, but it sounded like a branch snapping, like something was walking through the trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked towards the sound. As I got about halfway from my house to the edge of the woods, I heard a loud, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was an animal or human, but it's a wild area behind my house, and it could have been a fox or a mountain lion. Either way, I freaked out, ran inside, and locked all the doors and windows. I peered through the curtains, trying to see if I could spot anything or anyone. I opened the curtains to a man standing close to the window, staring directly at me. As soon as he saw me, he turned and sprinted towards the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, so I stayed up and watched more movies, and thankfully nothing else happened that night. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them what happened. Since then, I've been home alone 5 more times, and I've never seen the man again. I don't know what he was doing, and if the scream I heard was related to him or not, or just a coincidence from an animal, but it was a scary night. I live alone. This is something that happened just a few months ago. So my apartment is pretty standard for the most part. However, the front door opens right up to the outside, and there's a small grass area there. To the right of that is the parking lot. Then there are several levels of units. Mine is on the first level. I was at home one evening after I had gotten back from work. I was in the kitchen cooking, and right in the middle of that, my doorbell rang. I wasn't able to go over to the door right away, but I stopped what I was doing and then went over there. This was maybe 20 seconds after the bell had rang. When I got there though, I didn't see anybody. I looked out the window to as much as I could see, and there was nobody there. So at that point, I just went back to cooking. I didn't really know who it could be or why somebody would be ringing my doorbell. I figured that it was most likely someone at the wrong apartment though. Nothing else happened for a while. Several hours later, I was in my living room just hanging out. Then the doorbell rang again. I remembered from before and wondered if that person was back. Then the doorbell started ringing again and again, a bunch of times, really fast. I was so confused. I got up and started walking over to the door. In the time that I was going over there, the doorbell ringing stopped. Before opening the door though, I made it to the window and then looked outside. When I did, I was surprised to see that nobody was there again. They had been ringing my doorbell so many times in a row like they really wanted me to answer, and now they were just gone. I didn't know what to make of it. I looked around for several minutes but didn't see anyone. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I only stayed up for maybe another hour if that. Then I was tired and decided to go to bed. I started turning off the lights in my apartment, but before heading to my bedroom, I went over to the front door and looked out of the window one last time. However, this time I saw something. There was this tall and kind of thin man just standing there a few feet away from my door. He wasn't facing me, but kind of to the side. He didn't appear to really be doing anything though. The guy was wearing all black clothing, and I had no idea who he was. I thought that this was maybe the person who kept ringing my doorbell. It just seemed really suspicious though. I watched him for several minutes. The man just stood there and sort of looked around. Then he started walking away slowly. He went in the grass area out front, and then he walked across the quiet street that was there. After crossing, he walked right into the woods. There was no path or anything. He just went right in, and the woods there is very thick. I was so confused and also creeped out. Since then, I haven't had any more strange doorbell rings or anything. I also haven't seen the guy, and I'm still wondering who he is and what he was doing. I'm also wondering why he just went in the woods like that. When I was a freshman in college, I lived in the dorms and I got a random roommate. I thought that it would work out fine because I get along well with most people and make friends pretty easily. I figured that my roommate would probably get along with me as well, even if we didn't like the same things. Obviously, I hoped that he would have similar interests and maybe we could become good friends, because I didn't really know anybody else at the university that I was going to at the time. Well, when I moved into the dorms, my roommate was not there. His name was Ryan, and his stuff was there, but I wasn't quite sure where he was. After my parents had helped me finish moving in all my stuff and left, Ryan was still nowhere in sight. In fact, he did not show up until the next day. It was when I got back from my first class and had a little bit of time left before my next one. When I entered the room, Ryan was just there, sitting at his desk and apparently doing homework. Ryan was about average height and weight, had glasses, and short blondish colored hair. Right away, he did not seem very friendly. When I entered the room, he turned and looked at me, but did not say hi or anything. Just as fast as he looked at me, he turned his head back to his desk. I said hi and walked over to him and stuck my hand out for a handshake. I remember he sort of hesitated, but did shake my hand. I had a brief conversation with him, asking him about himself. He was not a freshman like me, but a sophomore at the school, and he was from a small town several hours away. That was really all that I gathered. Soon, I went to my next class. After that, things only got more and more strange. Ryan was not often in his room, but when he was, I would sometimes try talking to him. He would usually give me very short answers and never ask me anything about myself. I thought maybe he was just shy or uncomfortable around other people, but at one point, he told me in a very stern way to stop talking to him and to not talk to him anymore. It was pretty rude, and I no longer felt like he was just a shy kid, but a kind of rude one. Still, I didn't want it to be a terrible semester, so I chose not to argue or anything. I decided to just let him be on his side of the room, and I would do my thing on my side. As the weeks went on, Ryan would be gone for sometimes days at a time. I would wake up and he would just be gone. Then when it would be nighttime, he still wouldn't be there, and I wouldn't see him for several days. Then, typically, he'd just walk into the room like nothing happened, or I'd come back and he'd already be there. I never bothered to ask him where he was though, knowing that he didn't want me talking to him. I remember at one point, on one of the days that he was at the dorm, he left sometime in the evening. Hours later, at probably like 11 o'clock at night or so, I remember I heard talking in the hallway. It got louder, and I realized that two guys were arguing. I recognized Ryan's voice to be one of them. He loudly told the guy to shut up, and a few seconds later, he walked into the room. I found out the next day that it was another guy who lived on our floor who he yelled at. Apparently, all the guy said to him was, "Hey, how's it going?" when they passed each other in the hallway. Ryan snapped at him immediately, telling him not to talk to him, which made the other guy angry. They argued briefly before Ryan walked away. I found this out because the other guy came up to me and told me that my roommate was really strange. That's when we had the conversation, and I was kind of creeped out by Ryan's erratic behavior. As the next few weeks went on, I was hoping to be able to get a new roommate when the next semester rolled around. In the meantime, I just ignored Ryan and he did the same to me. It really wasn't that bad because he was typically gone, so it was mostly like I had my own dorm to myself. You just never knew when Ryan would be back or how long he would be there. So one day, I remember that I got up and went to class. Ryan had been gone for the whole night and was still gone when I got up and left. I was away for several hours attending my classes. When I returned to the dorm room, I went inside to see everything on my side of the room just gone. It was the craziest thing that I'd ever seen. The bed, desk, and chair that came with the room were still there, but literally everything that I had was gone. My books, my blankets and pillows, clothes, snacks, and everything was nowhere in sight. Ryan's side of the room looked exactly the same, and Ryan was not there. I went inside the room and looked around, trying to figure out what happened. I was sure that I locked the door when I left, and I immediately suspected Ryan. I started to look on his side of the room. He really didn't have that much stuff to begin with. He really just had some clothes, a few blankets, and some notebooks. There was no place that he could have put all my things. After realizing that my stuff was definitely not in the room, I walked out into the hallway. I went to the resident assistant and told him what happened. We did a small investigation looking around the building, and soon we got in touch with campus security. Unfortunately, the dorm building was really old and did not have any security cameras inside of it. Luckily, I had made a few friends by that point in the school year. One had a dorm room all to himself, so I stayed in his spare bed for the next couple of nights. An investigation was done, and Ryan was nowhere to be seen. Several days later, though, my things were found. They were located a little ways into a woods just off campus. He had tossed all my stuff there. Ryan, meanwhile, did not show up for the entire rest of the semester. I was given a new dorm room all to myself by the school, and they also gave me a gift card to buy some new stuff, so that was nice. But as far as I'm aware, Ryan never showed up to campus again. I have no idea where he went. He was a very strange guy, but I'm glad that I didn't have to live with him any longer. This happened when I was about 10 or 11, camping with my mom near a river in the woods. It was just the two of us out there, no one else around. The nearest farmhouse was a couple of miles away, but we were mostly alone. We had the tent set up and a small campfire going when a little before dark, this man arrived to our site. The area we were in was open to anyone wanting to camp, so it wasn't strange to see somebody else, but he had no gear with him at all. He made conversation with us and eventually came around to warning us that there were wild dogs in the area that we needed to watch out for. My mom and I were slightly uncomfortable because he didn't leave and said that he would stay at the campsite a while to protect us from the wild dogs. My mom hinted several times that we would be fine and that he was free to leave because we didn't need his protection. But he didn't leave. He stayed a long time, but there wasn't much we could do because it was a public campsite. He had the right to be there if he wanted, even though he had no camping stuff with him. Eventually, my mom told the man that we were going into our tent for the night, thanked him for keeping us company, and said that he could leave and we would be fine. I asked my mom quietly if he was going to hurt us, and she said of course not, but I could tell by the way her voice cracked that she was scared too. We didn't want to provoke him, but we didn't want to make him feel like we were scared either. So we just crawled into our tent while the man kept sitting on a log at the fire pit. I don't think my mom slept that night, as she had a knife close to where she lay in the tent. I watched the man through the flap in the tent for a while. At one point, while sitting by the fire, he pulled out a long knife and started sharpening it on a stick. He just stared down at the blade and ran it along the stick, making these slow scraping sounds. I asked my mom if he was going to kill us, and she kept saying no, but I could tell that she was worried. She tried not to show it, but she was prepared for the worst. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up a lot to see my mom was still awake, lying there and listening to the scraping sound of the knife on the stick. By morning, the guy was gone. I wasn't sure how long he had stayed or when he left. After packing up our gear, we stopped by the nearest farmhouse to tell somebody about the strange man. At the farmhouse, the old man there listened to our story, then kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, just doesn't know how to mind his own business." Apparently, he lived on a farm nearby, and the old man promised us that he'd have another word with his neighbor, reminding him not to be so rude and strange. A few years later, after our camping trip where we had met Ivan, I saw something disturbing. I was watching the news, and a man had been arrested who was a suspect in several missing person cases. They showed his photo on TV, and even though it had been a few years ago, I instantly noticed it was the guy who had been with us at the campsite. His name was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who had been picking up hitchhikers along the highways and killing them, and burying their bodies in the woods right across the river from where we had camped. I can't even describe the way I felt when I realized it. The guy who had been lurking outside our tent, sharpening a knife, talking about wild dogs, had been a serial killer. We had come so close to him, and I had no idea at the time. I don't think I'll ever forget that night and how lucky we were, but it still haunts me. A couple of years ago, my phone broke. It had been pretty old, and I was sort of meaning to get a new one. But after breaking, I had to find a new one fast. I thought about going to the store or looking online. But to try to save some money, I went on Facebook Marketplace. I also wanted to get one as fast as possible. I had heard there were a lot of good cell phones there for cheap. After maybe 30 minutes of looking, I found one. It was the same phone that I had before, but a few generations newer. The price also seemed very cheap compared to what it would be elsewhere. So at that point, I decided to send the seller a message saying that I wanted to buy the phone. Now, the seller's Facebook account was pretty mysterious. Their name was just JM. I clicked on their profile, and they did not have a profile picture. There wasn't much information about them either. Still, I didn't think that was too big of a deal, and I contacted them. It did not take long before I heard back. The seller, Jay, I guess, told me that I could buy the phone as soon as that night, and I agreed. I suggested that we meet at a local shopping center. However, Jay said they could not do that because they had kids and could not leave their house. Instead, I was supposed to come over that night. I said okay, and I agreed to it. I understood that people with kids probably wouldn't be able to just go whenever. So I was given an address, and that night I drove to it. It took maybe 15 minutes to get there. It was a little bit far away in an area that I had never been before. When I got to the address, I saw that it was a house that looked slightly run down, and there didn't appear to be any lights on inside. The whole neighborhood looked a little bit run down. and the houses had fairly large properties. I had no way of texting the seller that I was there because of my phone being broken, but I had my watch, and I was right on time for when we agreed, so I walked up to the front step and rang the doorbell. After maybe 30 seconds, the door started to open. There were two doors, a screen door and then an actual one. The inside door opened just a few inches, and I saw a woman was standing behind it. She told me to go around to the back and then close the door, so I walked around to behind the house and then entered a back door there. This led into a dimly lit kitchen area. The woman was there inside and sitting at a table. I entered and then sat down across from her. It appeared as though every light in the rest of the house was off. We both just sat there in awkward silence for a few moments. Then I mentioned the phone, saying I would like to buy it. The woman said that she would go and get the phone and got up. I kept sitting at the table. She left the room and I waited at the table. The whole thing so far had seemed really strange. As I looked around, I saw no signs of her having kids. So I waited at the table for at least a good 5 minutes. I didn't know what was taking so long. Did she lose the phone or something? I decided to ask. I called out asking if she was okay, and she called back from the other room saying yes, and it would just be a moment. So I kept sitting there, but then at least 5 more minutes went by. I was starting to feel nervous. It was just really strange. When she left the room, she didn't turn any other lights on either. I could barely see around the kitchen as it was. Eventually, I got impatient and I stood up. I walked to the end of the kitchen and to the entrance of what appeared to be the living room. There was no sign of the woman. I called out again, asking what was taking so long. This time, though, I got no response. I kept standing there looking into the living room, and there was a hallway at the end of it. It was really dark, like I said, but after standing there for like a minute, I thought I saw the woman cross the hallway. She did not bother to say anything or acknowledge me. This was really weird. I walked back into the kitchen. I thought about things, and then I decided to just leave. This whole situation was creeping me out, and I didn't know what was going on. So I walked over to the back door, left, and then walked back out to my car. When I did, I looked back at the house. I saw now that one of the lights was on in a front window which hadn't been before. The woman was looking out of that window and staring at me from inside. It just really creeped me out. I got back inside of my car and drove home. After that, I went and bought a cell phone from the store. It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the texts continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all. I was selling a desk on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. It was a pretty nice desk in my opinion, and I had bought it from IKEA just 2 years prior. However, I was going to be moving and I decided to get rid of it. During this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. I remember that after I made the listing for the desk, it took a couple of days before I got any responses. When I did, I got a message from a man named Charlie. He said that he wanted to buy the desk. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation between us other than that. I was happy that somebody wanted to buy it, and I made sure that he was good with the price, which he said that he was. I thought the price was reasonable, so I was glad to hear that, and then I gave him my address. We agreed that he would come by the next evening at about 5 o'clock. And when the next evening rolled around, I had the desk just inside of my front door for Charlie to come and buy. He got there at about 5, and I let him inside of my house. Charlie was skinny with somewhat curly blondish hair. He was wearing a sweatshirt. After we said hi to each other, I showed Charlie the desk and I told him that I could help him take it to his car. Charlie went up close to the desk and looked at it. After a short time, he told me that the desk did not look like it did in the pictures. I asked him what he meant. I was very confused because it was exactly the same as the pictures. I had taken them just days prior when I had listed the desk, and I really hadn't touched it since. Charlie said that it just wasn't how he thought it would be. Then he said that he decided not to buy it. I was disappointed, but I said okay. Then he turned and left. I was confused by what he had said. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting, because in my opinion, the desk was just as it was advertised in the listing. I decided to just move on, and hopefully somebody else would want to buy it. So the night went on, and I ended up staying up pretty late. It was nearly midnight. I was in the other room, and I heard the sound suddenly of somebody trying to open the front door. When I heard this, I walked over and looked out of a front window. I saw a man standing there, wearing a hat that was mostly covering his face. But I then realized that this was Charlie. I didn't know what he was doing. After literally trying to open my front door, he then walked away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around to the back side of the house. He tried that door, which thankfully was locked. After that, things were quiet for a bit. Then he returned to the front. This time, he actually knocked on the front door of the house, but I was not going to answer it. After being at the front door, he moved to several windows. It seemed like he was trying to look inside. I had covers for most of them, but I could still see his shadow on the other side. After he was still in my yard prowling around for that long, I decided to call the police. I told them the whole story, and within 10 minutes, an officer was there. Meanwhile, Charlie had stayed there the whole time. When the police arrived, he tried running, but was quickly caught. He did not break in, and I think he ended up getting off for the most part. I have to think, though, that he was trying to find a good place to break into my house. I'm really glad that he didn't. It was a Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hang out at the park. We were bored, and the night felt perfect for some fresh air. Around 10 p.m., we heard a car approaching. It was slow, the headlights cutting through the darkness. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed it was moving towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it was an old beat-up sedan with the windows tinted, so we couldn't see who was inside. Probably just somebody passing through, I said, trying to shrug it off. But as soon as it got closer, the car stopped right in front of us. We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The engine idled, and the driver's side window rolled down. Staring out the window that had just been rolled down was a clown, complete with a painted face and wild hair. He had a wide grin that looked more unsettling than friendly. "What's up, kids?" he shouted. his voice high-pitched, and he asked us if we needed a ride. We all exchanged nervous glances. Nobody said anything, and we just hoped that he would drive away. There was something off about him, his smile and the way his eyes seemed to be darting around. The clown called out to us again, saying, "Come on, don't be shy." My friend Sarah was the first one to say anything, as she whispered to us that we should leave, her voice shaking. She stood up and we all followed her lead, backing away from the bench. "Wait, where are you going?" the clown asked, still grinning. "I'm just trying to be friendly," he said. We turned and ran towards the nearest exit of the park. I looked back once, and the clown was still sitting there, his smile now more sinister. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. Out of breath, we piled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We were all on edge, checking the windows to make sure that the clown wasn't following us. We eventually relaxed a bit and put on a movie. Hours passed, and at around 1 a.m. after the movie was over, my friends began to leave one by one. After the last one left, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I settled onto the couch, thinking I might finally get some sleep. But then I heard a faint sound outside, an engine slowly driving up the street. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. There it was, the same old sedan from earlier, and the window rolled down with that same clown staring straight at my house. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, and his grin seemed wider than before. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself or risk being seen. I stayed away from the window, pacing in the dark. The engine continued to run, and I could hear the faint sound of some circus tune music playing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't want to look, but curiosity gnawed at me, so I moved back to the window to take a look outside. I could see the clown now tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, still wearing that disturbing grin. Suddenly, he turned his head towards my window, as if sensing I was watching. My heart stopped, and I ducked down quickly, wondering if he had seen me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps, but instead, I heard the engine rev and the car speed off into the night. That image of the car and clown inside scared me for a while, and for the next couple weeks I was paranoid, always checking around me if it was nearby, especially at night.